This is Warbird Radio.
On this episode of Warbird Radio, we're diving back into our past and we're bringing back an old friend, Chris Henry. He's now, get this, he's now the museum director up at the Experimental Aircraft Association in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. But when we knew him, he was an air traffic controller up in Elkhart, Indiana, and he hosted a show right here on Warbird Radio that many of you will remember, called Warbird Rescue. Joining us now from the mothership up there at EAA, Chris Henry. How you doing, bud?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Now you're an author, in addition to museum director. Almost called you a curator, but you're so much more than just all of that. You're also sort of a gumshoe historian too, which I think is great. And now that you're an author, I guess you're like an official historian. So,
well, lucky to get to be part of the team here and get to do some pretty cool adventures. When you work here, you kind of wear all hats in your areas. So, it's it's a lot of fun.
I want to get into this because your career started around just a few words. Hey, kid, put your finger in this hole.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ruined for Life, Rob Morelli. I had, I wanted to be a construction worker. And
I just love that line. I wanted to be a construction worker when I was a kid because what kid doesn't want to drive big bulldozers and have fun?
Yeah, exactly. And my family owns a construction company, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And when I was a kid, I saw the movie Top Gun, and I was like, oh my God, like that was cool. And then a little bit later, my uncle showed me Memphis Belle, and I was just ruined. I mean, I was ruined on wanting to be involved with historic airplanes. And what actually happened was they were restoring 909 out at the Beaver County Airport, just north of Pittsburgh. And it was just about near the end of its completion. And I got to go up and really check it out and asked if I could volunteer. And I was just a kid. I was 12. And thank God, Rob Morelli, Bob Morelli, Claire Paisley, and a couple of those guys, Bob Hudock, they were like, yeah, we'll take this kid on and let him hang around here. And then
so you show up. Let me just paint this picture because there's a great picture of you that we've got to share at some point. But you show up in your high tops.
Yeah.
You've got like...
And Reebok tops. Yeah.
You've got your terrible towel with you or something, probably from Pittsburgh, and you just show up. And Morelli, who is just a few years older than us, he's there working with his dad, who was a B-17 guy in World War II. But you don't know that part of the story yet.
No, I wouldn't even come to know that for many years. But so there's Rob. He's working on the number 3 engine of the movie Belle, which was there, getting some work done. And I don't know what he was doing. I still don't know to this day, but this thing starts spewing oil, and he's just looking around, and I'm standing there just kind of looking at the airplane, and he just goes, "Hey kid, come here." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Put your finger in this hole and grab." And I'm just plugging a hose, while he's went and get rags and clamps or whatever. And I got out. I mean, I ruined the shirt I was wearing, but it was like, oh my God, this was amazing. So yeah.
I love the line. I just love that line though. And you guys have told that story at countless times. And I don't think anybody ever believes it, but hey kid, put your finger in this hole is what started it all for you. With Warbirds. Let me make sure I clarify that, with Warbirds. So that's
exactly.
That's great. Exactly. And then the rest is history. I mean, your career just really took off after that. We met when you were working in Elkhart, and you and Rob Morelli, who are still friends to this day, started a show rescuing warbirds that needed some attention. A lot of them were static, and what you would do is you'd highlight the airplane or the project, and man, over the years that you guys did that show, you had everyone from Jack Roush to, just the average run-of-the-mill museum volunteer that had a heart for this stuff on your show.
Yeah. What it was, Rob and I, we kept in touch. We lived in different states, and then I became an air traffic controller in Indiana where he was. And we both talked about, there was this... there was sort of a negativity on the airplanes were gate guards, and I get it, because that's not the perfect way to preserve an airplane. But when I started digging into it, almost every airplane had these wonderful champions that were doing their best. Not all of them, but there were a lot of them.
And by gate guard, you mean an airplane that's sort of parked outside, it's on a stick?
Yeah,
or
a lot of times on a and what we were finding is a lot of times some of them didn't have a champion, and where some of them had gone wrong was, well-meaning, like a VFW or something, had requested this plane because somebody of note from that town flew it. And then decades and decades and decades later, they had forgotten about it. The town had forgotten that this person, was part of it. So we're like, when able, let's maybe go out and find some volunteers that are dying to get involved in a Warbird project that are right in our own hometown, could help clean up this aircraft, maybe bring some light to a hometown hero. And at the end of the day, everybody's better. The people can get involved in an airplane. The airplane gets to at least be, cosmetically into a better condition. And we're shining a light on the hero, that flew it, or the people that built it, whatever the reason was that this thing ended up in the town, which a lot of times had to do with they were built there or something. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, it was it was a real sort of like Bad News Bears approach to trying to fix an airplane up, but we got a few fixed up. I mean, you
did get a few fixed up, and along the way, you discovered a couple of talents that today their own careers have just blown up, like Chad Hill. I mean, for one.
Chad was amazing. We did a C-47 at Grissom Air Museum. That we did it. It had been painted for the anniversary of D-Day, and it had been used. I think they used like a latex or house paint, and it all cracked in the sun. And so we took a lot of time stripping that airplane back to bare aluminum, and then painting it in the markings of Jim House, who flew in the China, Burma, India theater as an air commando. And then Chad came out with his dad, and we painted nose art on it. He did this amazing job in adverse conditions painting nose art. But we had the airplane remarked as Jim's, and Jim was still with us when we dedicated the airplane. He was still alive. He got to see the airplane dedicated. His family was all there. Matt, you came all the way to help be air boss and cover the event. And Laura Stantz and Trey Carroll and Nathan Davis, those guys gave us air support and did a flyover. And what was interesting was we saw the Air National Guard wing that's based there kind of become more interested and start to take a role. And, hey, this is our heritage as well, and we should really be taking a little bit more of an interest in it. And then, so they were there. The base commander was there. So we did that. There was another group that did an F4. Along the way, we discovered while we were at Grissom, there was a B-17 that, it needed help, but really it needed more help than could be provided there. And it really needed to come inside. And the wonderful folks down at Warner Robins were able to give it the proper restoration and home. That airplane is just absolutely beautiful now. It looks like it came out of the factory. So, and it's inside, which is the ultimate goal for these aircraft. So,
especially the World War II stuff, and you stop and think about like a World War II artifact being left outside in the elements.
Yeah.
And there are some that still are.
Yeah. And there's a few, no matter where. I know for a long, there's places like Arizona where it's a little not as bad, but at the end of the day, you wouldn't want to leave a Civil War axe outside or something. It's time to bring it in, and we were lucky to help at least be a connection, and really enjoyed hearing some people that got out and through that process, meeting you, and then starting our show, the Warbird Rescue Hour, was incredible because it really working with you and doing this show really led me to this sort of unafraid approach to just asking people, hey, do you want to come on this show, and just reaching out and not being afraid of doing that, where there's a lot of people that, they won't do it. They won't, there's just that barrier of this person's going to say no. And again, Bad News Bears approach, where I'm like, what's the worst they can do is just nothing or say no. And the best thing is they say yeah. And a lot of times we really bonded and became friends with a lot of our guests on there. It was really a phenomenal experience.
It was a phenomenal experience, and it was great to get to know you and Rob over the years. And now look at where you're at now. You and Claire Paisley, you brought up Claire Paisley, your mentor in life and so much more. When the two of you were going up there to the Brown Arch, standing there at AirVenture, would you ever have imagined that someday you'd have a house there and an office?
No. I remember
neither would Claire. That's my
my first trip up here. I was just telling Matt Yunkin about this the other day. My first trip here, Claire literally just called and said, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and he was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Nothing." He goes, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I said, "Nothing." And he goes, "Do you want to go to Oshkosh?" And I'm like, "Oh my God." I read about Oshkosh. I wanted to come up. And my parents said I could go. I was 16, and we came up, and it was unreal. My very first thing I saw as we were walking through the gate, he said, "You're going to get to see things that you've never seen anywhere else here." And the very first thing that happened after he said that was Matt Yunkin's dad went by doing like a half slow roll on the Twin Beach.
Bobby Yunkin. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know a Twin Beach would do that, And then Hoover was still flying at that time. And then, I remember I walking into the museum, which I always loved the EAA museum, and there's the P-38 Marge. And there was Marge, the real Marge, sitting under the wing signing autographs. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is and I always said there were no ropes around the planes or the heroes. And, you could literally walk up to a P-51. I'm a model builder. So you walked up to an airplane and you asked the owner, like, if you could maybe poke your head up in a wheel well to take pictures and stuff. And like, they were all good about it. I mean, a lot of times the right owner and the right day would be like, well, go ahead and climb up on in it and take a look. I mean, it's a really unique place. And I'm really honored to be here. I'm thrilled to be the lead of the museum. And we do some good stuff. I'm really proud of the work that we do here.
I think it's great. And, of course, you and your gumshoe investigative team there at the EAA Museum, you and Hal Bryan, who is a wonderful guy, a tiger moth guy, in fact. The two of you wrote a book called The Final Mission, and we're going to talk about the book a little in just a few minutes, but it's a wonderful book. And it's your sort of, I guess, your love letter, if you will, to the men and women who cared for these airplanes in World War II and beyond. And it's just it's a great thing to have around the house and to sort of dive into. It's filled with a lot of great Chris Henry stories too, because there's people and paths that have crossed to make this possible. We're going to talk about that here in just a second, but I've got to just toot your horn a little bit more, because I know you're not going to tell this story unless I make you tell it, because it's such a wonderful story. You become the director at the museum, and that's great. That's a rather recent thing, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. How long have you been in that seat now, Chris? It hadn't been long.
What's that?
How long have you had the seat? Because it hadn't been very long.
Let's see. It was May, so I started in this position in May.
One of your last things as a guy working there, not the museum director, is you start going through the logbooks on a Corsair. This is Connie Edwards' old Corsair, a West Texas veteran and Warbird collector and lover of old airplanes and aviation. You start going through this logbook, and lo and behold, what do you discover?
So this is probably one of the only good things in my life that came out of COVID. So during COVID, we were like, hey, Charlie Becker on staff here said, you guys ought to do a webinar every month, because they do webinars on welding and riveting and stuff. And he goes, we should really do one on the museum. And what we started talking about was, well, that's a great way to, keep people involved in the museum, but it also gives us this really great ability to just go and become the experts of every aircraft in this collection. Like the museum team should know everything about it. And then when we record these, we could share them with our volunteers and museum docents. And that way, they can know what is good to say. I was really happy that I was able to, we still do these, able to provide the docents like, hey guys, watch these. everything that's in here you could say about this airplane. And that way we're giving factual information, which is sometimes a little bit hard with some of our volunteers. I think every museum experiences that. So we like to make sure everybody's given good information. So at the time that we were going to start this, Devotion, the movie, was being filmed, which was based off the Adam Makos book. And that story tells the story of Tom Hudner, Jesse Brown, and the men of VF-32 on the USS Leyte during Korea. And we're like, you know what? Corsairs are really topical because they're all over Facebook. Why don't we do the Corsair? Like, that'd be a good one. And I had heard stories that, like, it was on the story I had always heard was it was built too late for the war. And then it went to the Bunker Hill, didn't see any combat on the Bunker Hill. And then this was during Korea, and then became like an air racer, and then Connie Edwards got it and gave it to us. So we started going through it, and we found this logbook, and the logbook dates all the way back to the original acceptance flight in Stratford, Connecticut at the Chance Vought factory. And
where Jerry O'Neill waved at it as it took off. Yeah.
Exactly.
Our good friend Jerry, if he's listening. Hello, Jerry.
I remember sharing pictures of Jerry and Chris Soltis when this was going on. I was like, guys, look at this.
Look at this. Two of the greatest Corsair fans ever, and big-time volunteers and directors up there at the museum.
Well, they've saved the Corsair.
Right. That was a gate guard, nonetheless. But
it was a gate guard, and it's absolutely gorgeous. They've done beautiful work on it. So I'm flipping through the pages, and so far the pages were matching up. It was built by Stratford, the Connecticut plant at Chance Vought. End of the war. Goes almost directly into storage at a blimp hangar down in Georgia. And comes out for Korea. It goes to a Fazron, a replacement depot, Fazron 2. And as I flip the next page, and it just, in the book, there's like a stamp that's signed, and it says transferred Fazron 2 to VF-32. And it was picked up by Marty Good. And I'm like sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, this went to VF-32. That's pretty wild. And it's early 1951. So I'm like, okay, well, it's after the Medal of Honor mission that Tom Hudner went down to try to save Jesse Brown on December 4th, 1950. And then it all starts to make sense as we're going through it. And they're like, well, VF-32 only lost 2 Corsairs in combat. Jesse and Tom's. And this airplane was the replacement airplane for one of those 2 lost. And then on the next pages, it's literally all of the pilot. Basically, everybody except for Jesse depicted in the book and in the movie flew the airplane. And we have their names. I mean, so Marty Good, Savoli, Wilkinson, Hudner, these guys all flew the airplane.
So what's going through your mind at this point? You're sitting there at your desk. You're reading this logbook. What's going through your mind?
I'm like, this, I actually started double checking to make sure this was the right book, and I'm like, is this right? So, and I'm a big fan of, you can't claim you have Babe Ruth's bat unless you can go get Babe Ruth's bat. And so we immediately started contacting family members. Thanks to John Anderson, a good friend, and then Adam Makos himself. And and the whole Makos family, really. And we start putting it all together. And what we did was we basically made like 3 or 4 way connections. So like we would check our book versus the logbook of Tom Hudner, Savoli, and everything matches up. Like they had the same dates and same bureau number, and it was it. It was confirmed. This was our airplane. Our airplane was on the USS Leyte.
You have Babe Ruth's bat at this point. I mean, you just holy smokes, Chris.
At the meantime, there was another part of this, and that the airplane was very. You have to understand, this restoration happened in the 80s, and when the airplane was painted. It was given, in the 80s, paint jobs weren't necessarily always dead on accurate. But John Hopkins here was very, very, very passionate about this project. And he had the airplane painted really, really accurately. I mean, he used the right lacquer paint, the right color, the Chance Vought used. And being that it was the 80s, it was really interesting because there was a lot of back and forth between him and Paul. Paul was actually wanting to paint it as Pappy Boyington's airplane. And John Hopkins was like, there's enough Boyington stuff out there, and also it'd be the wrong version. Ours is a -4. And he says, what about a guy who doesn't get a ton of credit, like Ken Walsh, who was the first Corsair ace, who later flew a -4 on Okinawa? And so Paul said, yeah, go with that. And at the time, Ken Walsh was still alive. So the airplane was painted as Ken Walsh's airplane. And, all dark blue, and had the kill flags right over the white 13 on the side. And this was John's baby. And now I had to pitch an idea to John and to the board here and to Jack that we should spend the funds to completely strip all that paint off, repaint the aircraft as it appeared in VF-32, which we knew what it looked like. We actually have 3 photos of the airplane. And they agreed. They said, yeah, but let's do it right. So John got that blue paint again, that lacquer blue. He actually had it specially made for the project. We contacted, working with the Naval Aviation Museum and the Marine Corps Museum, to make sure that we had the right we really looked at like what Jeff Duford in the Air Force Museum did with the Memphis Belle as a guide to how to do it right on any airplane. So when you go out and look at our airplane, the numbers actually hit the panel lines in the right places. It's the right font. Everything's right where it should be, because we followed the NATOPS manuals and photos. For example, our airplane was a replacement airplane, and it was 209 was our number. But 209, they must have had a different stencil, because the rest of the airplanes had what I would call it almost fit right on the one cowling piece. It was a smaller number. Ours, for whatever reason, had a bigger number. It actually even went out onto the cowl flaps. So we went ahead and made sure we spec'd that out so that it matched the photos of the airplane during that period.
Did you use a thread saw at any point in your?
It would have been too big. So
your big monogram Corsair model that you're building, because that's the level of detail.
It is. I'm a model builder, and I get that the details matter.
Yeah.
And
they tell a story.
Yeah, and you could really hold your head high. Like, as little of a story as that is, that our stencils, for whatever, were a bigger size on our cowling, it also tells a story of, like, these guys probably had a bunch of planes to stencil, and they didn't, they weren't following ops manuals. They were doing whatever they could out on a carrier deck, probably, or a flight line at a naval air station. And, it's all part of the story, and what I find is if the airplane differs from the photos you have of it in the display, a lot of people want to know, like, well, why does that differ? And it's not a great answer if you're like, we just didn't do it right, So we're really proud of it. We're really proud that airplane looks like it did.
All right. Well, hang on a second. We got to take a quick commercial break. But when we come back, we're going to tell the rest of the story about your Corsair and how it actually made a big appearance at AirVenture too.
Sounds good.
Yeah, stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back. The world's fastest commercial break right now.
This is Warbird Radio. Lock and load. This is Warbird Radio. Tune in. Take off.
We're talking to Chris Henry from the EAA Museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He's the museum director. Before we left, we're talking Corsairs, and eventually we'll be talking about his B-17 book in the last few minutes of the show. But Chris, we got sidetracked, as we often do. Your Corsair, the restoration, you discovered that not only Tom Hudner flew, but pretty much everybody in VF-32. You decide to roll this thing out at AirVenture. You have family members there from, I guess all of the vets, really, that touched this machine. Talk to me about this stunning conclusion here at AirVenture with your Corsair.
Well, absolutely. So this airplane, we did fly it for a few years, and now the airplane, it hasn't flown, but it's still what I would call a flight status airplane. So
does that mean it could fly at some point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And so most of the airplanes, we take an approach where some of the airplanes are donated with the people who give them to us say, we don't want this flown. For example, I think the P-38 is an example of that. However, some were given to us with the idea of we could do whichever. The Corsair used to fly. It hasn't in many years, just because of our Air Tours operations with the B-17, B-25, the Ford Tri-Motor. Can't keep them all going. And plus, we need some stuff for the museum. So it was decided that, there's a lot of Corsairs that are doing the air show circuit. Let's use ours in the museum. And it was in an aircraft carrier exhibit that was kind of generic. I mean, it was basically kind of telling you, like, this is what life was like on an aircraft carrier. So while we were redoing the Corsair, we also redid that exhibit to actually talk about VF-32, talk about Korea, talk about Tom and Jesse. However, while going through the airplane, it was time to re-preserve it. And we said, while we're going to be going through this and put hoses and things like that in it, we were having a Corsair reunion. And we said, well, we should fire it up and start it. And so we made that decision that we were going to go and do an engine run with it. And when we gave the signal to start engines, we actually had Jesse Brown's family here. Wow. The woman standing with the fire guard that said start engines was Jesse Brown's great-granddaughter who gave the signal to start engines. And so his grandson and great-granddaughters and great-grandson were here. We've had Tom Hudner the third here in the cockpit. And they're the ones that cut the ribbon for the exhibit, and we dedicated the plane. We also had Marty Good's daughter here. And so it's been really, really incredible. We've had Jesse Brown's flight instructor who, didn't really get portrayed correctly in the movie. His flight instructor, they were good friends right up till when Jesse passed. And as a matter of fact, his flight instructor was so affected by Jesse's loss that he transferred from fighters to rescue helicopters and flew the rest of his time as a rescue helicopter pilot as a memorial to Jesse. So, it was amazing to have those families together. And now you can come see the airplane and you learn about Korea, which is something that isn't really being taught a ton. I always tell everybody if it wasn't for MASH, I think a lot of people would maybe not remember Korea. So,
well, they call it the Forgotten War for a reason, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it was a real honor. I mean, that's a career highlight to get to work on that. We added a Huey to the museum so we can talk about Vietnam. It's a real 3-tour.
We need another episode because I'm telling you, the Huey, it just went. I mean, you restored it down to the beer cans that they had and the rocket tubes. I mean, just all types of level of detail there with having you on board up there at EAA. And I think the folks who come through the museum can see a difference. I know I certainly can, and that's just a testament to the work that you're doing up there, and it's great work. I am still, and I've been very vocal about this. I am still of the opinion that we need Jerry's one-man band in the museum.
I know.
And I want to be there for the ribbon cutting because I think I probably have all of Jerry's tapes somewhere. I really do. That was always a highlight going up there. And I remember. You had something to do, by the way, with that plaque that's sitting there on the pole now, naming that Jerry's Corner. Remember
that's
that?
Right. Yeah.
We brought him up on stage there at Theater in the Woods, and
I remember we got that put out there. So
I'm telling you, Chris Henry, a force of good up there in Wisconsin. Let's talk about this book because your book is filled with these kinds of stories, and I just wanted folks to hear this from you because I think this is so much of who you are. You get a good story in your gut there, and you don't let it go, and it's just wonderful because now you've got a whole book on this kind of stuff. When you were palling around there and sort of coordinating the B-17 flight experience as part of your journey there at EAA, you'd hear all these stories. You'd hear stories about why people were booking a flight. Maybe it was a wife who had lost a husband in the war and never remarried and held on to that. And this is a true story, by the way, just wanted to experience what her late husband went through. All of these stories are now in this book, and it's called The Final Mission. You can get it right there at EAA's website. But this is such a wonderful, wonderful book to have in any aviation collection. Chris, I applaud you for your work on it.
Well, thank you. It was really an honor to get to do it. And when I started down the journey, I had no idea that's what was going to happen. I started here in our membership services department, and the front line of that is people booking their B-17 and Ford Trimotor flights, and now B-25 flights. And, I would simply start asking, just while we were talking, because when I took people's information and you ran their credit card to book their seat, it would take, a couple seconds. So there was this awkward sort of silence, while you're waiting for everything to process. So I would just strike up a conversation, and I'd ask, what, it's not a small chunk of change to go fly on a bomber. So there's got to be some interest there. What's worth it for you? What are you doing? And a lot of times, sometimes it was someone who just was a bucket list item. They wanted to go do it. And that's totally respectable. I love that. And then there were people that were sharing that, like, well, my dad's still with us, and he was a B-17, bombardier, and we want to get him one more ride. Or, my grandfather's not with us, and I don't really know much about him, but I know he was in a B-17, and I want to go sit where he sat. And to me, that was incredible. And then I started just asking, what do you know about them? And a lot of times, they didn't know a ton. They'd have his name and maybe a bomb group, and that was about it. But thanks to these wonderful bomb group associations, they keep really great records. And I was able to find pictures of these guys and their crew up by the nose, like that classic photo of the guys up by the nose of the airplane. And you could see the name on the nose and stuff. And I would share that with these people. And a lot of times it was a photo they'd never seen. They were seeing their grandfather, in a way that they had never seen him before. And that was really, really rewarding. And then when the veterans were still with us on those flights, those guys were just tickled to come and share stories and photos. And they would bring their scrapbooks or photo albums and tell these stories that you knew were coming from the heart, or that they had packed away for years and they just needed to download them. And I really think there was an avenue of healing or closure. They were out at the airplane one more time with people who spoke the language, and it mattered to them. And I think it mattered to them to see, there's a lot of younger people that are around our B-17, working on it and out seeing it. And I think it mattered to them to see that there were people that want to hear their stories, that their service still matters to these young folks. So it was really cool. It was a really, really amazing experience. So I didn't know what to do with all this. So I just started posting on Facebook stories of, like, here's who's out at the airplane today, and here's who flew with us, and here's a really amazing story they told. Because no matter if it's a B-17 or a T-6, or, a Stearman or an Elbert or whatever, everybody that owns and operates these airplanes knows that you fly in somewhere and you see a veteran that comes out and they tell that story, that a lot of times you're sitting there like, wow, I wish I would have recorded that. That was really cool. And it's the reason you do it. It's because, you're preserving a legacy for these folks. So I had the time that I could, write it down, and it wasn't always, the whole story. I would just take whatever I could, and
make it happen. Well, and you did make it happen. Look, I know we are way, way over time, but I want people to buy this book, and I want you to come back on the show. And we're so far over the time limit. It's not even funny on what I told you this was going to take and what the show normally is.
All right, you anything.
Well, no, but look, give them how it's EAA.org. And you search for the final mission. In the last 30 seconds, I think you can do this. You got to just give them the quick notes on the gentleman who was at the prison camp, because this is just unreal. It's in the book. You've got to go read it. It's, again, the final mission, available at EAA.org. The link, by the way, is in the blog article we wrote about Chris's show appearance. So it's already up there. You just click on it, and then you order it, and Chris and Hal will sign it for you if you ever see them in person at EAA. I guarantee it. They won't charge you a nickel. Well, maybe they will, but it won't be much. So no, but tell them real quick in the last few seconds here, Chris.
So briefly, I'll tell you that one of the most powerful stories was a woman who wanted to buy a ride for her husband, and it was a bucket list item. And when I asked her if he was a veteran, she said no, he was too young to fight in the war. He was in a concentration camp. He was a young man of Jewish descent who was in a concentration camp. He had accepted that this is where his fate was going to be, and then the camp got liberated, and there was a B-17 crew that made 2 trips dropping food into the prison camp.
The same day.
Same day, same B-17 crew. They did 2 trips, dropped food. The airplane was called Pandemonium Rains, and we got them all set up for the flight. And then a couple days later, before the flight, we had to set up about a week in advance. This gentleman was losing a battle with cancer, so it was a bucket list item for him. A few days before his flight, same town, another gentleman pops up and says, "My dad flew Pandemonium Rains, and he's still with us." And I wanted to get him a ride on the airplane. He won't talk about his missions, but he will tell me about the time that he dropped food into a concentration camp.
And you go, oh my goodness, at this point, here you go again. Babe Ruth's bat shows up.
Right, exactly. I mean, you could not plan that. So we got them to fly together on the airplane. And or these airplanes have this sort of magic around them. And I know that maybe sounds cheesy, but I can't explain that any other way than something like that.
It's absolutely the truth. These airplanes do have magic, and I love that you always say that. And I think it's wonderful. Chris Henry, man, thanks for coming on the show again.
Absolutely. Great to be on with you, Matt. It feels like old times.
Well, hey, look, go buy the book. Again, The Final Mission by Chris Henry and fellow Warbird enthusiast Tiger Moth pilot Hal Bryan up there at EAA. 2 great guys and a wonderful, wonderful book. Chris, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll talk soon. Folks, if you enjoyed the show, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe Warbird Radio to Warbird Radio. And we look forward to having you back here on our next episode real soon. So just follow the podcast feed, and we'll be starting Safety Month coming up here in March, where we're rolling all the airplanes out, getting ready to fly them again in the spring here in the U.S. Want to keep you safe in doing that. We'll have some maintenance experts, bailout experts, all kind of stuff that we'll be pulling not only from the archive, but bringing in new as well. Thanks again for being here. So long for now, everybody.
Reminding you that radio engines don't leak oil. They just mark their territory. This is Warbird Radio. Tune in. Take off.